Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, I welcome you to this fantastic event of the Confucius Institute. And I'm sure many of you will know me. I'm Joseph Lam, the director of the Confucius Institute. Now, today we have a really fantastic, distinguished lecture by a really, truly distinguished speaker, Professor Stephen West. And I just try to find out some information to introduce him, and then I have to print out a 17-page CV. I don't know how to begin. But anyway, I'll say this. Then Professor West is an internationally educated scholar, but what counts is he gets his PhD from Michigan. Right? All the teaching in learning in Arizona, Maryland, Germany, doesn't count. The degree from Michigan, that's count. I think UM is very proud to have such a distinguished scholar. And currently, he is the Director of Graduate Studies of East Asian Faculty and School of International Letters and Cultures at Arizona State University. He is the Foundation Professor of Chinese at the Arizona State University now. And before that, he was Louis Agassiz Professor of Chinese at UC Berkeley. So not many people will leave Berkeley for a more distinguished school, but that's what Professor West did. And Professor West had many awards and distinguished fellowships, but I think the most fantastic thing about him is that he has the wonderful right of declining a lot of very important fellowships. So he declined American Council, he took that one, American Council of Learned Societies, but he declined the fellowship for Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and he declined the Fulbright, so not many people can say that. So that is really distinctive. We all know Professor West is a very distinguished scholar on Chinese literature and culture, especially of the late medieval period. So he has lots of articles and lots of invited lectures and presentations at national and domestic international conferences. What I would like to say that is, even if you don't have to read all the fascinating stuff produced by Professor West, if you just read the titles, then you will see how distinguished and ingenious and creative his scholarship is. And if you read the titles, you really want to read his scholarship. So, of course, one of his most famous work is on the history and reconstructing Kaifeng. So his big monograph coming up is Remembering Kaifeng, Memory, Space, and Community in the Imaginary Recreation of the Eastern Capital of Northern Song. So this is very fascinating, and a lot of puns and things and all the historical documents about Kaifeng. And let me give you a few fascinating titles that is to give you a sense of the scholarship is so amazing. And how about Innocence and Allure, right? About Chinese. And then how about Spectacle, Ritual, and Social Relationship? The Son of Heaven, Citizens, and Creative Space in Imperial Garden. So those are very specific and very evocative of fantastic place. And then I really love this one because quite a few of us also work in this field. It's Huizhong in the Afterglow. So that word is, wow, means a lot of grandeur. And then for me as a musicologist, then I love this Autumn Sounds, Music to the Ears. Ouyang Xiu's full on autumn sounds. So those are fascinating things. So I hope my musicology students sitting here can pick up something from literature studies and historical studies. So without further ado, I'm sure you have a fascinating talk on demonic soundscapes from the Ming court plays, and I just love something demonic.
It took me all of 10 minutes to make those 17 pages from Wikipedia. It was really easy. I want to thank the Confucius Institute and Professor Lam for the invitation, and for the audience for coming. It's always great to come back here. This has nothing to do with it. And I have a different title. Chinese call this hanging out of a goat's head, and someone got me. I can't believe actually that it's going to be soon 43 years since I left here. It's a long time, and it's really nostalgic to come back in midwinter and walk around and see things. It's really it's a wonderful place, and I'm really happy to be able to come back to it. Yes, I'm alumnus, 1972. Great. I'm going to translate this poem because some of you, I realize, don't know Chinese. I don't know, just off the top of my head, on the 7th day of the 7th month in the Palace of Long Life, at night's have, when nobody's around, at the time of our intimate, silent, whispered conversation. In heaven, we desire to be birds with a single wing. On earth, we want it to be branches intertwined forever. Heaven lasts forever, and earth goes on and on. Each has a time that they will end. But this vexation unreels literally like a piece of thread, goes on and on and on, and never has a period or a time that it snaps. Now, my interest in perception, which was actually stimulated by Joseph and a conference he had here several years ago, began in earnest when I was rereading this famous poem by Ju Yi, this Chonhange, in preparation for class, and came again to the last three couplets. As an ending to the poem, I've always been completely struck by the beauty created by the unreleased tension of the last three words in particular. The lines present really a complex set of issues that challenge, I think, our perceptual habits. And I don't just mean our personal habits of perception, but also the habits of a modern age. In these 6 short lines, we are presented with various sorts of time, the specific month and day when the herd boy and the weaving maiden had their annual tryst across the Milky Way, and the precise moment in the past when Shenzong and precious consort Yang uttered their oath of love. It creates places that are both local and universal, a shared space of momentary pain in the eternal impossibility of human love, one that is silent and unpopulated except for the lovers, and one broken only by whispers. Finally, the poem closes with time both as long duration and as an eternity of unfulfilled desire. Interwoven through this continuum are powerful human emotions of desire and frustration. But what really caught my attention was the recalled sound, the oath that they had whispered so long ago. Here we are drawn back in time in the narrative itself, our vision directed to a single act within a deserted hall. In the spaces that the poem opens up, the sonic moment of a whisper in an otherwise silent scene where there is no fixed visual anchor becomes a distinctive perceptual viewpoint, one among several in the flow of the poem, from which the reader subject constantly organizes and reorganizes the physical and emotional states of the narrative. And because it is a human voice that we overhear in the whispered uttering of the promise, it provokes an intimacy that seems vaguely related to the erotic. There is little doubt that of the 5 senses, touch is the most intimate. But sound, I believe, is the second. It is in some ways touching at a distance. And here the whisper of their voices carries almost the same weight of closeness as a physical touch of lips against the lover's ear. If we go back and think about the first lines of these 3 couplets, we can also see that it is sound, indeed, that simultaneously gives the static spaces of the Hall of Long Life both depth and temporality. With a near complete lack of activity, we are presented here as much with the soundscape as with the sightscape. It was sheer genius to end the poem with a metaphor drawn from the unreeling of a single strand of silk. For we do not first see a string snap, but we hear it. And it's the sound that directs our attention toward the never-to-be-realized visual moment when the dangling ends of a thread, tremulous in eternal separation, might be released of their tension of sorrow. We are caught with the lovers in an unendurable anticipation, waiting for something that never comes, the sound that they and we will never hear. Now, of course, we cannot hear the sound itself, but we imagine through our own perceptual experiences what that might be like. I admit that we must acknowledge that the soundscapes, sightscapes, and what I am going to term smellscapes of any scene produced by art are an emotional and subjective response to a completely hypothetical fact, which is staged in the text as objective reality. And because we are all foreigners in any time or place except that of our own moment, we hear, see, smell, touch, and taste those objective hypotheticals differently than any other audience, including the original readers. We cannot determine with any certainty that sound, sight, odor, texture, or flavor signify in the same way now that they did in the past. Neither can we assume that the cultural significance will be the same. We have only to consider the issue of aesthetics in China and the West. I've always been struck by the fact that when you judge porcelain in China, you snap it and you listen to the sound of it. In the West, you look at it. It's a completely different way. And if we think about the way that literary theory and criticism runs, in the West, it's about emotional states which are tied either to religious or platonic moments. In China, it's tied to taste, literally taste, the way things taste. We only have to think of the Chinese phrase, wei wai zhi wei. Taste that's outside of taste has a great description of what a fine piece of literature is. Or think about Jie Xi's Du Su Fa, in which he talks about the fact that you have to take a text and chew on it until the meaning comes out, and then you ingest it inside of your body. So, before modernity, I think, and global culture, we have to understand that there are considerable differences in sensations. And actually, none of us are privileged. We might be a native Chinese or a Native American or whatever. None of us are privileged to know about the past. We can't assume that what happened back then happens now. We're so overwhelmed by visual media that we tend to neglect these other elements of sensation. Now, if we ask ourselves how sound is produced in text, we come quickly to the conclusion that sounds are fully vernacular in the real Latin sense of the word. They spring from the hearth of our own physical place and are ineluctably tied to place both in terms of geography and culture. The production of language exploits the sense of the local. When an author writes, he, she, or they imagine a hypothetical situation. This situation reintroduces to the author a set of ritualized phrases and words that are associated precisely with that situation and only with that situation. Thus, the language that comes from this is produced in varying proportion by both the author's imagination and by what I call the sensation signatures of the local. The reader recreates this imaginary space based on shared knowledge of the relations between sensation and place, tying sensation and space together through something we might call shared subjectivity. I think we have to realize that when we are directly attuned to something, it's because we have this sense of vernacularity, that it belongs to some space that we understand, and it belongs to all of the things that come out of that space, including the language of it. So it always remains a kind of local situation. Moreover, the way the receiving subject processes these sensations is probably related to the actual way that we sense. 3 of the 5 senses are inward, or outward. Inward. 2 are outward. I mixed up the line, sorry. Touch and sight move away from the body. Taste, which I think we really have to acknowledge is a combination of smell, sound, and texture. Smell and sound are taken into the body. And while we can inhibit touch and sight and taste, there is no way to not hear or smell, except physically to block the receptors. The eyes and mouths can shut themselves off of the body's own accord. The hands can lie still, but neither the nose or the ears can close. So, with all that being said, we're finally coming to the Erlang play that I want to talk about. This is sort of the background. Actually, if anybody has questions while I'm talking, just raise your hand. I'd be happy to talk. I hate reading from a paper. There you are, I'm unintelligible without it. What's the difference, you might say? Okay. There are 4 Ming Dynasty plays that stem from the imperial court. They're called Neifuben, and they come basically from the office of bell and symbol, which was run by eunuchs. I don't know what that has to do with anything, but I just thought it's interesting. They are fierce Nata, transforms thrice. Erlang of the Debouchant beheads the demon dragon. The divinity Erlang shoots the demon locking mirror. And the divinity Erlang locks away the great sage equal to heaven. The Nacha play is kind of interesting. He quells demons, of course, and these things must have been fantastic on stage because Nacha can produce at any time 3 heads and 6 arms. I suppose he's sort of like the Australian frilled lizard, you know. Anyway, the beheading of the dragon is one of the major myths of Erlang, that he actually stops floods by going to the river and cutting off the head of dragons. And the demon locking mirror, what happens is that he goes to see his buddy Nacha. They're probably brothers in the Buddhist tradition. And I don't know if any of you remember the old Superman movies where they had the guys locked inside the mirror. This is exactly what happens. These are mirrors that they have to lock away demons. And Erlang and Nacha get drunk and they start shooting arrows, and one of them accidentally hits a mirror and sets them all free. And Erlang has to go track them down. And the last one, which is the one that I want to talk about, is in some ways the most interesting. Because it's about Erlang and 3 monkeys. One of which is called the Great Sage equal to heaven. And sage, in this particular instance, doesn't mean sage in the Confucian sense. It means a spirit or divinity. Now, in his introduction to this play, Wang Jiliet wrote, this is a pain to read it while you can read it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Originally entitled The Divinity Erlang Locks Away the Great Sage, a Ming Dynasty manuscript with no author's name listed. It records the story of the great sage equal to heaven stealing Lao-Tzu's golden elixir and then filching the wine of the immortals. He gathered together the various goblins in his waterfall grotto and held a feast. At that point, the Shangdi, the thearch on high, ordered the divinity Erlang to lead the spirit troops of the various heavens to capture all the goblins. They were taken under guard to the head of the court for exercising deviancy and were judged. These kind of spirit plays are most exuberant on stage, but there are very few points of excellence in the text. Certainly from the hands of actors, not worth considering. This is a judgment that could actually be levied on all 4 plays. They're not exactly wonderful works of art. Wang Jiliet has hit it on the head here. These things were absolutely fantastic on stage because of the costumes, because of the martial arts, all of that, and they just really do not have very good text. But that doesn't mean that they can't be rich in terms of social and cultural meaning. And I think this is the one place where we always have to realize that literary text is always subsumed to culture. It always has a cultural meaning. Now, Erlang, as a second son, is a complicated and ambivalent figure in Chinese tradition, both religious and narrative. He's probably best known in the West from his role in the famous Xiuji, the Travels to the West, and he has many guises. He is first recognized as the son of the Qin Dynasty hydraulic engineer, Li Bing, then as Du Jian, the brother of Nacha and the second son of Vaishravana, and in popular religion and literature after the Yuan period as either Yang Jian, as he appears in the Xiuji, or Journey to the West, or the Fengshan Yi, or as Zhao Yu, a Taoist from Qingcheng in Sichuan. Go back. Well, you're supposed to be at least 10% smarter than the computer. The Taoist from Qingcheng. Now, to go into the history of the various Erlangs is itself so incredibly complicated, it's unbelievable. What we do know is that it was canonized, Erlang himself, as the son of Li Bing, was canonized and appropriated as a state cult in the Song dynasty as a ploy by the Song emperor to enlist support in Sichuan in his fight against the Xixia. This comes right after he had suppressed the cult of Guangkou Erlang when they rebelled against the Song. So when he suppressed the cult, what apparently happened is that Qingcheng, which is right outside of Chengdu and the famous home of Taoists, began to promulgate this idea that Zhao Yu, a Taoist monk, is in fact Erlang. Now, the appropriation of local cults into a state-sanctioned and fixed deity is well covered in Valerie Hanson's book, something on the gods, I can't remember exactly. And Zhao Yu, who appears in our plays, was canonized by the Shenzong Emperor of the Tang, who authorized a temple to him at Guangkou in the 8th century. And he was made the ruler of Shu, the Chuanzhu, and then the realized Lord Erlang of the subtle wave from Qingyuan in the mid-northern Song, after his spirit helped the local magistrate suppress the above-mentioned rebellion of the Lubina people. So, but the actual origins are kind of interesting. There's one guy who has a very interesting analysis in which he thinks it might be actually a point of contention between essentially mountain spirits who lived outside of Chengdu back on the Tibetan plateau, which were actually led by a person named Yang Jian, and essentially agricultural deities that were hydraulic deities in the plain of Sichuan. I have no idea. Now, what happens in our play? Are we going to be surprised? Yes. The first scene, the celestial worthy of original commencement, one of the founders of Taoism comes on, says who he is. Says, I was born prior to the time of heaven and earth, when the way was prior to the chaotic confusion and the grand ultimate. Everything was mixed up like a chicken egg, sprouting the primal ether, when everything was confused. Well, you only read this once and you're totally confused too. Now, once the yang and the pure were turned into heaven, then yin and the turbid were turned into earth. Once they were separated, each held to one pole. He's talking here about the creation of the Chinese binary universe between yang and yin. I am the patriarch of the 9 heavens and the progenitor of the 10,000 sages. Now I pluck the essential radiance of the sun and moon, the burgeoning ether of heaven and earth, and in the furnace of grand ultimate I refine the golden elixir of the 9 reversions. Once it was completed, I will invite the mass of realized ones in the super-celestial and sub-celestial realms to come to a congress. He makes a terrible mistake. He assigns a Jintong, a Taoist lad, to watch the furnace while it's gone. Well, every good professor knows you never leave a graduate student in charge of your experiments. So what happens is that the monkey comes in, steals it, knocks over the furnace, and then runs to the imperial kitchen, it's called, and steals the wine and takes it away. The The deity that's in charge of it reports it, but it doesn't want the Shangdi to know about it, so they keep it sort of down here. And they enlist all these people from heaven and Erlang to come and get the divine elixir back and put the monkey back where he belongs in his cave of flower and fruit. So that's basically the total story. That's all there is to it. Now the background of the play itself is Taoist, and it features the various incarnations of Lao Tzu in the hierarchies of the Shanqing and Lingbao sects, and it is unusually faithful to the formation narratives of each of these Taoist traditions, although it is quite clear that the information has been copied from encyclopedia-like sources, such as the anonymous Ming work, the Sanjiao Yuanliu Soushen Ji, which has been incorporated into the Taoist canon, as well as surviving in many secular printings. Now the play unfolds in two times. Before heaven and earth were split apart, and afterward in two spaces, in heaven and on earth. It begins by foregrounding the typical Taoist evolution of the universe from undifferentiated chaos through shape, substance, and animating energy through the eyes of the Taoist God, which I just read you. The world he describes begins with the triad of mysterious, original, and inaugural. Xuan, Yuan, Shi. The triad then generates the highest heaven, which eventually divides into heaven and earth. This is accomplished through what has been termed the five-stage pattern that first appears in the Apocrypha of the Eastern Han. This pattern imagines a genesis of the material universe in 5 stages. The first is Taifu, which is primal ether, the first arrow. The second is Taishi, which gives form. The third is Taisu, which gives substance. And the fourth is Taiji, which gives animating ether. This is the way that the universe and everything in it is formed, and it's all formed before the actual split of heaven and earth. Now, after the division of heaven and earth, we find the divinity Beiji Zhang Wu, Shen Tian Huangdi. I'll give you his whole title here. Roving Commissioner of Inquisition in the 9 heavens, and powerful and humane Thearch on high. Original sage of dark heaven, master counselor of the Jade Void, realized warrior who governs heaven at the northern pole, and controller-in-chief of the court of exercising deviancy at the northern pole. So, this particular deity is born. He is, like everybody else in this text, a reincarnation of Lao Tzu, the original sage, who was born in the world at the time of the Yellow Emperor in human form. He is responsible for exercising deviancy, and he has become a made state deity. He's sanctioned by the state from about the 12th century onward, 10th century onward. But he really comes into his own in the Ming dynasty. In 1412, the Yongle Emperor sponsors a major construction project on Wudangshan, where the Dark Warriors is this center of worship, and he thenceforth becomes a major state god. He's also the main figure in the vernacular novel Beiyou Ji, which is the story of 7 of his adventures over the course of 7 incarnations. He's born at exactly the same time as 3 monkeys. Tongtian Dashang, the great sage who penetrates heaven, the great sage equal to heaven, and Shua Shua Sanlang, I call third brother trickster. Now, these 3 monkeys are atomistic sections, are portion of what is going to become the monkey that everybody knows from the Journey to the West movies and novels. Monkey himself is also born at precisely this time. He is born also exactly at the time that heaven splits. So this basically, what happens then is this guy who's head of the court of exorcising demons summons Erlang. Erlang brings with him Guo the Fanged, the swordsman ghost, his young male servant, and his dog. He appropriates something called this Juling Shen, which I take to be a giant a spirit of some kind. The 7 sisters or 7 sages of Meishan, and he leads a troop that has generals, what have you. The monkey, on his part, there is an intermediary that goes between heaven and earth called the Tianding. Okay. Basically, these guys move back and forth and transmit commands from heaven to earth. Now, the monkey enlists in his battle a macaque, a miho. Does anybody know whether the term miho tao is because it looks like a macaque, because macaque eat kiwi? I've never been able to figure it out. The spirits of gibbons and lemurs, the spirits of stone, and various forms of ghosts and demons. He also enlists practically every local animation of a spirit or sprite that can be had in the mountains of China. Now, this is important because essentially what we're seeing set up here is in fact court power, central power against locality. And this is very clear in the play. Now, the play, of course, makes a metaphorical linkage between the world of immortals and the imperial court. This is being played out in front of the emperor, so the emperor himself is watching this. And while it is ostensibly about Taoism, in fact, the underlying systems of symbolic encoding in the play are clearly those of the civil bureaucracy of Confucianism. For instance, the rewards in heaven are still those of the court. Oh, no, I skipped something. These uniformly are called spirits. Others call them great spirit. They call themselves small spirits. And here's the perfect reason for evil in the world. So, these are basically Confucian plays. So when the Tianding, the Lord of Heaven, comes down and the first time he meets Prefect Zhao, who is Zhao Yu, the Taoist, it says, because you are incorruptible and capable and pure in a ministry, because you hold to nature of loyalty and uprightness, therefore you're going to become a spirit. Now, this is an incredibly kind of cross purpose here, because these are all the marks of a good Confucian administrator, and in fact he's tapped to become a spirit because he's such a great Confucian, taking such good care of his people. So what happens is that you get then, basically, you get a raise in the ranks. As his buddy tells him, well, from the time you beheaded that dragon in the river, the Jade Fiarch knew you had such merit, and so he awarded you the rank of a spiritual being. He's giving you a rank, and all the perquisites that come with particular ranks. More money, better food, etc. And, as he says again, if you manage to subdue the monkey, then the Thearch on high will definitely raise your rank. He'll give you a raise. He'll give you a higher position. So essentially what we have here in this Taoist world, in which there's absolutely supposed to be no differentiation or discrimination, we have this imposition of a Confucian hierarchy of ranks. And actually I think this is because they're making this direct relationship between the world of the worlds and the world of the imperial court. And when Erlang then further says, I can't do it, the monkey is much too clever for me. He's always doing somersaults and changing shapes. And he says, you are a state-sanctioned true spiritual being, so how can you fear any kind of demon anomaly? Right? So basically what we're looking at here is this process of appropriation of local cults. Now, the Erlang cults has spread all over China. By the Song period, it was in Kaifeng. They had a huge complex there. It was in Fuzhou. It was in the Minnan area. It was all over China. So what's happened is that it became so powerful that the state itself had to appropriate the cult and make it a state-sanctioned cult and be able to govern it. So this is the way that the state dealt with one of the local problems. So this is a typical case, I think, where in dramas from the court, what happens is that they constantly, where violence and punishment, including revenge, are always removed from local or private sphere and put into the hands of the state as the authorized agent. Has anybody here read Mark Lewis's book on state-sanctioned violence? One of the issues that we see, anytime that the issue of revenge or local xiedo, these kind of things come, the state takes over and the state imposes the violence. So revenge, violence, bad action can be authorized through state power. The play thus clearly makes a claim for the court as a final arbiter on all matters, and on the punishment that is to be meted out to miscreants. In this sense, the spirit world is not just a metaphor, but it's also metonymy for the way that the world works in China. Okay. Now, the play, as I said, also is split between heaven and earth, and we have two distinct realms. One is we have the Yuqing Shengjing, which is the sagely realm of jade clarity. We also have the Xianjie, which is the precincts of immortals. This is contrasted with the monkey. Now, this is probably, can you read this? I don't know. This is the macaque. He says, I climb the rattan and rustle through the kudzu, threading through the forest top. Coming to rest, I pluck a fruit or steal a peach. Ooh, I see a lotus seed case growing on the treetop. I carefully look it over and inspect it with my eyes, and then, because my lips hunger for it, my heart covets it too. I reach out the branch, but I can't take it, and I do my whole arm and give it a shake. I never imagined, actually, that it was a hornet's nest. And so, this is sort of a typical description of the activities of monkeys, but I want you to pay particular interest in this, which is the issue about rustling through the treetops, because this begins a kind of leitmotif that goes through the whole description of monkeys. It's about this sense of rustling and inability to sit still, distraction, and all of this. So what's happened now, basically, is that you're beginning to isolate communities. And you're beginning to establish Jing and Jia, you're beginning to establish realms in which things should exist. So when Erlang calls the 7 sages, he says there are 7 brothers, etc. Because our bravery was straight and upright, the Thearch on high has let us hold sway over Mount Mei and follow the true Lord Erlang. They're confined within a space. They can be summoned there. They cannot leave it of their own accord. The 6th sage says, I have just left the boundary of Mount Mei, the Shanjing, the Jingjie Bian, right? So what you have these communities now which are beginning to be isolated to certain points. And the great sage that penetrates heavens, the monkey's older brother, says, look at these Gaoshan, look at these high mountains and the precipitous peaks and the wide canyons and steep cliffs. This is our realm. Anda Jingjie. There is an understanding that you have to say within your own realm. So what happens then is you have this kind of spirit world before heaven is done, and then you have the monkeys who live in this cave, the cave of flower and fruit, and you have the Meishan ladies who live over here on top of Meishan. So it is beginning to sort out for the court that, okay, you have a central government and you have local things that are happening. These have to be distinct. Now, for those of you who have studied Chinese, you're often taught that feng shui means a habit, mores, whatever. Feng shui is a very old term, and it implies that there is a certain wind that qi, the circulating ether within the earth, produces at any particular point in the landscape. And you have su, you have habits, ways of being habitus, within that space which are directly related to the wind that's produced there. So the reason it means custom is because it's a habit and a force of habit and a geological, geomantic kind of pressure that's exerted on the individual to be in a certain place. All pears in China are good, but pears from a certain place are the best. All medicine is good. The medicine from Sichuan is the absolute best. Walnuts are good. The walnuts from a certain place are the best. There's always this belief that there is a circulating ether that provides the best of things, the best humans, the best grapes, the best peaches, whatever. So what happens is this has to be controlled, and the state has to control this because the greatest danger to the state, of course, is what happened is the spread of the local, the ability to destabilize the central government. So we wind up then with two things. We have the grotto heavens of jade pylons and metal luster, which are above in heaven. They have metal or jade pylons. They have jasper fields, jasper ponds, jasper palavis. They ride around on clouds. It's a mineral world. It's stone, it's metal, it's chemical, and it's beyond change. There is no growth and no decay. This is a world of the way, what the Chinese call the Dao, which is non-changing. Arrayed against this, what do they eat there? Well, they drink the chemical elixir, which prolongs their life, and they drink xianjiu, they drink immortal's wine, which is not made like human wine. It's made from dew and all kinds of precipitates within this world. Arrayed against this, you have the flower and fruit mountain, where the monkeys live. Within this environment, you have the water screen cave. They eat wild flavors all mixed up together. You get away, dong dong, right? And they get around by climbing on vines and rustling through the woods. It's a world of flora and fauna. There's constant growth and decay, and they eat off the land. If they eat chemical elixirs, jindan and xianjiu, in the heavenly realm, this is what they get when they eat. They're going to feed all of the monkeys. They're going to feed them this elixir, and he's making a feast, so they're going to feed it. Well, it says I've only been come up with some wild flavor. The first will be Sichuan stir-fried favas-headed turtle. The favas head, you know what favas is, right? It's like fungus thing that's cracked. The second will be oil-fried fighting grasshoppers. The third will be tempura geckos. And the fourth will be scabby toads dry-fried in soy sauce. The other dishes aren't really so important. I crawled around and got a handful of water lice, and there's some tumblebugs, and I'll add some pepper and vinegar and make a soup out of it. And then there'll be scorpions and centipedes can stand in for wine snacks. No almonds for them. And live cooked rat snake will be the send-off dish. So you can imagine that these two worlds have nothing basically in common. So what happens is when the monkey usurps his position and goes into the other world, he steals this elixir. Now, this elixir is dangerous and potent in the wrong hands. It would give monkey power and eternal life. He cannot drink it. So, we see then the absurdity of placing this kind of celestial substance among this feast. Clearly out of balance. It's indicative of the monkey's inability to understand hierarchies or boundaries. If he doesn't keep desire within what is accessible at a local level, it has the possibility of destabilizing the entire cosmos. And by analogy, the state, the province, etc. So what happens is that what this reflects in the spirit world reflects the actual realities and anxieties of the Ming court. How to control local religion, local factions, local violence. You do it by imposition of state will. So sending Erlang is just like the emperor commissioning an army. What is enjoyment here? So it destabilizes everything. All of the institutional and social bodies beyond the individual itself. What is enjoyment for the immortal, something that enhances their purity, becomes a danger when it has the potential of augmenting uncontrollable desire, and the curiosity of creatures of quest. Monkey should be in the realm of decay, where the Wanwu, the so-called 10,000 things, exist, in the natural flow of creation and destruction. This is in fact the logical spot for what should be a local deity. To allow an ethically tainted individual or species of living being into the rarefied world of privilege creates remarkable dangers, both for the spirits and the court itself. So, basically we're dealing with issues of space. Now, if we think about, I want to use here for a minute Murray Schafer's classification that he drew in his fantastic book called The Sonic Environment, Soundscape, Sonic Environment and the Tuning of the World. He draws inspiration for this model from the psychological studies of visuality and identifies three features of what he calls soundscape. First, you have a keynote, which is an anchor tone or a fundamental tone. They do not have to be listened to or consciously. They are overheard but cannot be overlooked, for keynote sounds become listening habits in themselves. Now, if you think about how we might apply this, what we have in the case of the monkeys, right? You have these keynote sounds of the rustling, the constant kind of movement, the inability to be still. You have perfect silence, basically, in the spirit realm. Now, he also has what he calls signals, or what I called signatures earlier, which are foreground sounds that you listen to consciously. In the analogy of visuality, these sounds would be the figure and not the ground. It would be the thing set against the ground of the painting. In the Erlang plays, these are always warnings of significance to communities within the plays. It's always the sound of movement of troops, the movement of expressed often as thunder. It's the sound of battle, the sound of anger, the sounds of weaponry, the sounds of mounts on the move. Then you have something which is a sound mark, which functions like a landmark within a particular scene. It is a community sound which is unique and possesses qualities which make it especially regarded or noticed by people in that community. They make the acoustic life of the community unique. This is definitely talking about the monkeys, because when you read through this play over and over again, the monkeys are talking about crawling through the bushes, talking about splashing in the water, talking about making all kinds of noise, and these in fact are precisely what he's talking about here. The thing is, this particular, if we look, it also works for other perceptions. You know, it can't just be limited to sound. For instance, when the heavenly ding comes, somebody says, "Oh, 忽见响风," oh, I suddenly become aware of a fragrant wind swirling in. Certainly a divine general is coming. Or a monkey, when he says, "I was born together with heaven and earth, matured with the sun and the wind. My divine power is vast and great. Transformations of many kinds. I roam in pleasure through the grotto precincts of the immortals, admire grasses, exotic flowers. When bored, I circle about clear streams and play amid the pines and cedars and cypress." You can see the noise element here. "My clothes set a vexatious mist afloat, and my sleeves stir up a wild wind." He stinks. It's the only way you can understand this. The monkey stinks. So sound and smell work together here to create these communities. And you also have these signatures. My anger raises pealing thunder. Thunder is always used in literatures, no matter it seems what, to describe warfare and anger. Because thunder is the one sound that you cannot make as a human being. You can imitate almost everything else, but you cannot imitate thunder. It's beyond the human reach for replication. I don't know where that came from. So if we were to think then about how this formulation might work, we would have background. We'd have visual field and sight, a sound field, and odorants. And this would be heaven or the cave. We would have marks or signatures. In heaven, this would be coolness, harmony, sweet smelling, non-decaying. In the cave, it's decay, claustrophobia, a rustling noise, and a stench. And the signal sounds, when they come, are always about boundary crossing, about disruption, about warfare. So it's about when these communities are not authorized and come out of where they should be, there are always these sounds produced at the same time. Okay. I'm sorry it's not about sound as I was hoping, but I got sidetracked with this issue of power. I guess my point here is that perceptual mapping, how we treat sight, smell, and particularly sound, can be used in these texts and others to plot the formation of communities. We do this all the time, of course, but in a media-hyped world in which vision and sight have become the overwhelming modes of perception through visual media or reading, we often lose sight of how sound and smell can indicate community formation. They are certainly much more subtle than sight, and much more subtle than visual overload. And they tend to focus on and be tied to the body itself. The smells issued by the individual or collective body, the sounds that individuals and communities make, or communal bodies in motion, are a good example of this. The visual wash of modern times makes us see action without embodiment. If you think about this, right, we see human bodies all the time on television, but they are virtually cleansed. You see only the body. And you tend to focus on ideology and mindset, abstractions, as a way of making community things. You talk about belief systems or something, because you're looking at something which is totally disembodied in the sense that it has nothing of the body to it. It's only an image. Of course, you can imagine the smells, but that imagination is born in our own vernacular space and may be inappropriate. So this is why I think smell and sound are really important. Secondly, all of these communities are actually formed in local space. As long as they stay fixed to their local mountains or rivers or certain geographical areas, they do not present a problem. But when the local begins to usurp the center, it creates instability. The emphasis on Erlang as a state-sanctioned deity demonstrates how the state appropriates local cults when their influence spreads beyond the local boundaries. Even the monkeys, if they had stayed in their shui lian dong, if they had stayed in their waterfall cave, they would not have caused a problem. The monkeys could have gone on forever if they had just stayed where they were supposed to stay. Now, the rather overt comparison of the court and the state is also interesting, because the stress on control and punishment as authorized and the maintenance of hierarchy and privilege of access are rich in social meaning. If we think about how this issue of hierarchy and access works within the play, we see a simulacrum of how it works at court. I totally agree with Wang Jilie that these are not very good plays, but they are a good index, I think, to court anxiety. Now, they're not the products of either an imperial or bureaucratic author, but they're by actors who are at court and who can see the power dynamics of political and cultural situations and play to the superior side of those dynamics, giving voice to the authority in which they are embedded. In this way, they create a textual simulacrum of real interest and concerns. That is, they see the anxieties probably better than the emperor and his bureaucrats, who are so wrapped up in it they can't see it, but the actors, I think, see this very, very clearly. This also lends, I think, to a general problem. In the West, we have a deep skepticism about the reliability of literature as an index to historical and cultural process. From Plato to the new critics of the 1960s, the idea that literature is a lie, or simply a beautiful aesthetic construct, remains a profound influence, not so much in literature, I think, but in history, the discipline of history. It is often simply too difficult and painstaking a task to find the proper balance between the imaginative, and subjective flights of an author or writer, and the representations, on the other hand, of a shared subjectivity that can recognize the significance of political acts as well as the common human meaning in historical events. While inroads have certainly been made to resurrect the social and cultural nature of literary text by movements like the New Historicists, these attempts to link literature to cultural or intellectual history never go as far as the Chinese case. From the earliest time, literary sensibility in China has been tied to a natural, emotional, and ethical response to events in the world. And literature itself is seen as the natural but refined expression of that ethical nature and sentiment in reaction to those events. The right to rule in China is tied to the same perfection of a heightened ethical subject that, through right action and power of virtue that stem from that action, can influence the world beyond the self in concentric rings, first the family, the state, and then the known world. It's the Daxue. Logically, then, literature came also to be used instrumentally to critique political, social, or cultural actions that deviated from the ethical center, or, as in this case, to pander to the real power that masquerades as an ethical hierarchy. If you have a sense of ethical hierarchy which is built on superior-inferior, it is ripe for corruption. There's always oppression from above and servility below. And so, in this sense, I think, what we're looking at in these plays is an example of how you pander to this power and masquerading it as ethical hierarchy. So, didn't have enough on sound, I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you.
Anything, some questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So we are opening up for some questions, but I want to tell you people that to celebrate Steve's lecture, which is always very essential, so we have prepared a sumptuous reception after. So please stay for the Q&A and then for the reception. So,
Exactly.
So questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you elaborate a little on the term wild flavor? Because about 8-10 years ago, when there was a SARS outbreak in Hong Kong, and then it got into China too, and there was a lot of lying about it, more cases than they officially announced. Trying to determine what could have started it, this book I was reading said one theory was China was undergoing the era of wild flavors, and they were eating things like civet cats, which they weren't supposed to. But it was a sort of an underground status thing.
In South China, they say eat everything that moves except trains, everything that flies except airplanes, and everything that except you. This is you know, they always live off the land, right? And
Yes,
you know, like the lice. I remember when I was living in Beijing, there was a pond outside, and people would go around and gather small snails and bugs from the side of the pond. So, I mean, it's just, there's nothing wrong with it if you think about what we eat. But the wild flavor just means things which are not produced by agriculture, but which are available in nature. And includes things like civet cats, which seems to be the origin of the SARS virus.
So does China have other eras besides the wild flavor era?
They have had wild flavor from the beginning of civilization until now. I don't think there's been an era of wild flavor. There are always restaurants. One of my favorite is the Chinese term is kind of like an outlet for a major thing. It's there's a restaurant in Kunming that was serving things like giraffe, and it was a Manchu zoo, because what do you do? If you can't, what do you do with animals that are born in a zoo? You can't set them free. You would destroy the ecologies, and so they ate them, and they had these restaurants where you could buy, get giraffe and all kinds of stuff. So, but the wild flavor. I don't know. I deeply suspect anything that's said on television or radio about China. Who's the great cook? Ming, somebody? Yeah, but Yan, not Yan, the other guy. Ming. Tsai Ming.
Yeah.
Gates, in his Finding Your Roots thing on PBS, did a long thing of tracing his ancestry. It was totally bogus. He said, "Oh, in your family there's only one student who left." And they went to the place there, and here's the site. It's written in Jiantizi, Chinese in the bottom of 2007. So, and then he traced him all the way back to the Yellow Emperor. He said, "Oh, you're I mean, everybody is from the Yellow Emperor. It's just amazing." So, and this is so understanding. Western journalists, I think, want to write about something like this, and you have two things. You have the government on the one hand saying, "Oh, well, this is only a rare occurrence; it doesn't really happen all the time." Then you have Western journalists who, want to make an issue out of this. But it's probably no. I mean, it was certainly far worse than E. coli on lettuce, but it's the same problem. Yes.
But you present a play designed to do ideological work. It has a purpose and is supposed to create an effect in its viewers. And so the question is, does it work that way? Is Erlang attractive? Many of these kind of campaigns where people are pushing finance outside, the finance stuff is more attractive. And so does the play succeed in presenting the Monkey King as a poor example of how to live? And are they really, as you say, really concerned about just compartmentalizing and quarantine, and not so worried about what the Monkey King does on his own time?
Yeah, I think so. I think these plays are actually so boring and dead when you compare them like to either to the Shihua or the Xiuji. They're really boring, but it's because you do have this. They really are playing to this imperial interest and anxieties of court about how you maintain control.
But presumably they're trying to make Erlang attractive. Does it work in anything?
But Erlang is now a state sanctioned. He's part of us, right? So we can enlist him like we can enlist our mortal armies to go after people.
The contrast with Xiuji is very clear then, right? Yeah. Because he's very much a local figure that actually fight in the novel.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's he's also a different person now. So yeah, I think Erlang would be an interesting, very interesting PhD dissertation or something. If you have some good students.
Thank you so much for a wonderful paper. I did have a question about sound, to keep it stereotypical music.
Great.
But I was wondering...
Professor Lam will answer.
There's these amazing descriptions that I'm assuming come from the text of the play itself, describing sounds. But I'm wondering if there's any record or any way to know about sounds or sound effects that would have been created during the performance itself. So, people marching and they stomp or anything like that that would have helped the audience experience the sounds rather than having the senses.
Yeah, I'm sure there was. And I can only base it on Kunchu performances and GT performances I've seen that, the martial part of it. And the costumes are obviously very, very elaborate because you do have Nacha suddenly showing up with 6 arms and 3 heads. And there's a moment in the play where it says Nacha turns into 3 arms, or 3 heads and 6 arms. And you have to ask, what is this? These things must have been stunning on them because you have the monkeys, you have everything going on. But all I can think of is visual because I don't think the sounds of either Kunchu or Jingxi were probably the sounds of court plays in Zaju. It's a different kind of drama. I don't know. I really don't. It's interesting because the onomatopoeics in the language itself make no distinction. They are exactly the same onomatopoeics that would be used to describe General Guan Yu in his great military conquest. So The actual terminology is that there's sets of onomatopoeic tropes that are used to describe battle scenes, and those same phrases are used with Erlang as are used with regular generals. You know, xiu zhou zhou and all this stuff. So, yeah.
Maybe you could say more about the script and what kind of stage directions it has. Everything you showed, the stage directions were quite minimal. There was one, for instance, where somebody's off stage and meeting and so forth. It's kind of hard to figure out exactly what they had in mind. Anyway, what is as a text, what does it tell us about performance?
Actually, I didn't cover it, but these are the plays. 3 of these plays have the
Costume list.
The costume list, and you can read these costume lists and you get a sense of
They
how
include
they change.
some props as well, right?
It includes props and costumes, so you have it describes act by act how they're going to be dressed. The guanwu themselves are actually, the stage directions themselves are fairly minimal. It will say something like, you know, Erlang enters accompanied by Guoyaji and Nutsar and Goar, and that's all it will say. So you're left pretty much to imagine what was going on stage just by looking at the action itself. The nice thing about Zaju performance is the stage was uncluttered, so long arias are sung which describe the actions that are going on stage, and you can get some sense of what was being done by reading those. But in terms of, like, you know,
So for a Qingkawa text about the journey to the west, for instance, when you want to change into somebody with 3 heads, the first actor goes down into a stage door, a new actor comes up, he's already dressed in the other costume. But you can't tell from what we know about Ming theater how they do these.
yeah, we don't know actually if there were stage doors
Right?
in Ming. We know there were in Qing, of course, but that's already been pretty much influenced by the other world. So we don't know, and I'm presuming they would perform at court, and there was a stage at court, but they probably would have come back in and out through the Guilindao, through the backstage, rather than through the floor. But it certainly was something. There's no end to the ingenuity when it comes to props. And, you know, I wish there were more to say about the plays, but you know, they really are boring. Yeah. I like them, but I'm a bored guy.
What is the role of humor in these plays, and how does it interact with the political message?
The macaque is humorous, but the macaque actually plays the role that a major domo would play in a more domestic play. The major domo in a domestic play will usually speak in local dialect, will have a really filthy mouth, right? And this, he just is kind of a buffoon. But, so he plays essentially the role of the major domo that you would find in the other plays. And he's the only kind of comic leavening in the whole play. You know, the rest of it is pretty serious. I always imagine the actors are being totally ironic when they're saying these things. And I think that's a possibility, actually. You know, these plays, they had to go, when they went through the court, the bell and drum, they had to read every script, and somebody approved every single script before it could be performed in front of the emperor. Because, you know, this is big time. And so it's pretty doctrinary.
I once gave Joseph a copy of Evelyn Moore's Helena, which has this great scene of some local king in Great Britain sitting through a 5-hour play about the history of his own family. But he's the only one who liked it.
Yeah. And I'm sure that what they liked was the visual aspect of the spectacle of it. And that would include noise and sound and everything else, costumes.
Can I go back to the conceptual map where you have the sound on the bottom as the vernacular. I wonder, since you're talking about play script, right, and you've done a little bit of comparative thinking with CLT and the way that these things are pictured there, the differences, but is there part of this that, part of your project that hopes that focus on sound would also help us to recover something about performance? Something about the experience of seeing it perform, of seeing plays perform? Or could you do sort of a direct comparison, comparison of perceptual maps of this statute script and the COG
No.
novel?
No.
So it is related to performance.
Apple orange. But what you can do, and which people are finally starting to do, is you can say something about performance in court. Because for years people have lumped these 100 and, I don't know, that's 30, 200 plays, 180 plays, produced at the Ming court, as all this is Ming court stuff. But now we know that they're not all alike. Some come from the Court Entertainment Bureau. It was used for officials. Some come from the early Ming court in Nanjing, and they're far different than the ones done in the late 16th century, because they didn't go through the thing. So we're beginning to be able now to sort it out, and I think the indexable keys to performance are going to be found not necessarily within the text itself, but in what surrounds it, these costumes, little things that are appended to texts and scripts which indicate where they come from or what they're done. So I think that, you know, this is like the next major area, and people are already working on Tantenu at SOAS is doing a lot of work on it. So I think this is where the comparison is going to be drawn. It's so hard because the genre dies out. You know, and just like you, in making any comparison with what comes after would be sort of like having Kunshu and then losing that and saying, oh, it must be like Jingxi. It's just not. So,
As opposed to the Qing, we really, when you're talking about palace plays from the Ming, it's copies. The actual critters haven't come down to it, right?
no, the manuscripts, yeah, the manuscripts
They
have
are
been
copied though.
Yeah.
And so they're not the kind of documents that were actually used in the court. And so there's a presumption that they're accurate copies.
Actually,
we don't really know.
the 16 Yu Xiaobu plays may have actually been court plays. They're markedly different in their structure than the others. Yeah, part of the problem is that when he copied them, or when he had people copy them, they regularized a lot of it, but the early ones they didn't. If you take Dan Dao Wei, for instance, in the original, it shows it's structured, formatted differently than, say, a later play, much differently. You know, and it has scene breaks and things, so we have a sort of a better idea of what they might have been as performance. But you're right, most of them are copies. But, I think they're probably pretty accurate copies of the text, not the format of the text.
I have a hunch, it could be crazy because I don't know anything about it, that the Jinjie, this concern with boundaries, may be a metaphor for jurisdiction, for bureaucratic jurisdiction, and the need to maintain this. There is a story, the Jiwen Tran, which is you find on a lot of Ming and Qing vases. I don't know if there's any plays about this. The story goes back to the Han, an official. Actually, he's a chancellor. He's chancellor of the Han Dynasty. He's out on a tour, and there's a riot, and there's dead people in the street, and he doesn't do anything. And later on, he sees an ox breathing heavily. He stops. You know this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's all about jurisdiction. Basically, I may be chancellor, but I have no jurisdiction in the county.
Right.
It's up to the county officials. I'm concerned with national affairs. And also the language you showed us, I think you're absolutely right, which maps onto bureaucratic language, is actually not about virtue. It's about performance and merit. And that is not imposed from above. Actually, that you can be demoted or promoted depending on your performance. So it seems to me that this may, anyway, I'm wondering if the gene gem might actually have to do with the concern about jurisdiction, which of course does lead to chaos. I'm thinking about our own country right now. Some of the awful things happening in our country now have to do with people overstepping their jurisdiction or confusing public and private and so on. That really is a mess.
There's more.
We need a monkey.
I actually think, I think it's more geographical. I actually think that these are, when we think about how these local deities are placed, right, they're always associated. 50 years ago, Fred Brandauer wrote a book about the movement of a local treaty home, which when they built the Clover Cove Dam in Hong Kong, it's about the movement of this treaty home. They actually, he was no good anymore. He couldn't move it because he belonged to this area. And so they had this huge ceremony sending him away because they didn't need him anymore. They really was somewhere else in the community. So I'm always struck by the fact that how the tool of 2D, right? It means right here.
Well, region is a good metaphor for jurisdiction. If you're going to map it onto a spirit world.
Yeah.
The other point that occurred to me is that you talk about controlling religion. I mean, as you know, in fact, we had Jews, Nestorians, Buddhists, Muslims. The state didn't help people. So what kind of control are they doing?
No, it's when it becomes a preliminary movement, or when it becomes something like militarism or whatever. It's when
violence.
When it becomes violent, it becomes a social movement rather than a religious movement.
Yeah, I can see that. Because in Europe, as you know, they really did control religion, and you have to believe what they told you.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
It's funny, they didn't have that.
Thank you very much.
But this is actually so beautiful and sound because you're making a lot of very important points. I know it's difficult to ask about the development part, but I wonder if your detailed reading of the text, do you find any local phrases that would suggest that some of the people would be saying and speaking in dialects versus the official people would be speaking in a more chord or language?
You can find these in early texts. The Yungan, the Qiwen, right? Yungan Qiwen Central. And there you can find it. You can find it also in the Yankan Central. But after they get under the hands of editors, it becomes fairly standardized. And it's at that point that I think that it moves from vernacular to colloquial. And colloquial, I think, is a universal form like literary Chinese. Is something you learn to write. It's no longer vernacular in the sense it belongs to a certain locality or group.
Other questions?
For me?
So, well, maybe we should transgress from the more formal room to the more hybrid room so that people can mingle with Steve and ask more private questions. But thank you.